They said the great hall of Hymir Castle had seen everything. Wars decided over wine, marriages arranged with a single nod, even kings humiliated before their own banners. But no one expected a simple castle maid to bring a powerful lord to his knees in front of everyone. The torches burned low, making the gold on the walls flicker like living fire. Music stopped mid-note when Lord Alistair rose from the high table, goblet in hand, eyes fixed on the girl with the plain gray dress and white apron standing near the pillars. Her name was Mara. To the nobles, she was invisible. To him, she had just become entertainment. "Come here, maid," he called, loud enough for the hall to quiet. He wanted a distraction. He wanted someone weaker to crush. Mara walked forward, trying to steady her breathing as dozens of eyes stabbed into her back. She had spent years serving in that very hall, carrying food for people who never once looked at her face. Tonight, they would. Tonight, they would all see her. Because Mara carried one secret that could burn Lord Alistair's perfect life to the ground, and he had just given her a stage. Mara felt the weight of the hall before she even stepped into it. The stone floor carried every vibration: clinking goblets, dragged chairs, drunken laughter, like the heartbeat of a giant beast. Hymir Castle's great hall was built to make ordinary people feel small. Tonight, it was doing its job perfectly. At the far end, beneath banners of deep blue and gold, sat Lord Alistair of Hymir, wrapped in velvet and pride. Rings glittered on his fingers, but none shone as cold as his eyes when they found her. "You, maid, come here." The word maid rolled from his tongue like an insult. Conversation stopped. Forks froze halfway to mouths. Somewhere near the musician's corner, a lute string gave a sharp, awkward twang. Mara's fingers tightened around the empty wooden platter she carried. For a heartbeat, she considered pretending not to hear. If she walked back to the kitchens now, maybe he'd choose someone else to torment. But that wasn't who she was anymore. Mara lifted her chin, just a little, and walked forward. Each step sounded too loud in her own ears. She passed tables crowded with nobles and merchants, their perfumes mixing with the smell of roasted meat and wine. Some watched her with mild curiosity, others with open amusement, already sensing a show. She recognized many of their faces. They never recognized hers. Near the middle tables, she caught a glimpse of Thomas, another servant, staring at her with wide eyes. He gave the slightest shake of his head, a silent warning. Turn back. Bow low. Apologize for whatever he imagines you did. Mara's feet kept moving. As she reached the high table, the air felt thinner. Lord Alistair leaned back in his chair, one leg crossed over the other, goblet dangling from his fingers as if even gravity obeyed him out of politeness. "Closer," he said. She obeyed, stopping just below the small raised platform where the lords and ladies sat. From here, she could see everything she usually only glimpsed from afar. Embroidery and gold thread, jewels catching firelight, smug smiles carved into wine-flushed faces. "Mara, isn't it?" Alistair asked, voice smooth and loud. Her heart kicked. He knew her name. Not because she mattered, but because he made a habit of knowing things he could use. "Yes, my lord," she answered. Alistair smiled like a cat finding a trapped bird. "Do you know why I called you here, Mara?" His tone was light, playful. It fooled no one. Mara clasped her hands in front of her apron to hide the faint tremor. "No, my lord." "Look around," he said, sweeping his goblet at the hall. "What do you see?" She hesitated. Dozens of eyes were on her, waiting, measuring, enjoying. "I see. The great hall, my lord. Guests. The feast." Laughter rippled along the high table, soft and cruel. "No, no," Alistair chided, as if correcting a child. "You see your betters, Mara. Men and women who carry the weight of this kingdom. People who make decisions. People who matter." His gaze slid over her from head to toe. The plain dress, the worn shoes, the calloused hands. And then we have you, a girl who wipes up spilled wine. Mara's ears burned, but her face stayed still. Years in the castle had taught her how to turn shame into stone. Behind Alistair, Lady Eveline, his pale, sharp-eyed sister, watched with bored interest, toying with a pearl earring. Alistair set his goblet down, deliberately loud. "I'm told," he continued, "that you were hovering near the envoy earlier today, our esteemed guest from the south. Is that true?" A murmur went through the hall. Heads turned toward the place where, earlier, a man in foreign silks had stood beside the king before retiring to guest chambers. Mara felt her throat tighten. "I was serving wine, my lord," she said carefully. "Nothing more." "Nothing more," Alistair repeated, savoring the words. "And yet someone saw you, listening." His eyes gleamed. "In fact, they say you looked as if you understood what the envoy was saying in his strange tongue." He let the hall drink in the ridiculousness of the idea. "Imagine that, a castle maid, understanding the language of al-Shahir." Polite laughter broke out. Some nobles didn't even try to hide their derision. Mara's pulse pounded in her ears. Somewhere deep in her chest, anger and fear wrestled for control. "I don't intend to let gossip go unaddressed," Alistair said. "So let us put this to rest, shall we?" He straightened in his chair and raised his voice. "Bring the parchment." A servant in finer livery than Mara's stepped forward, carrying a small rolled scroll tied with blue ribbon. Mara recognized it immediately. Her blood went cold. That was the note the envoy had slipped to the king's scribe, the one written entirely in the curved script of al-Shahir. The one no one here was supposed to read except, perhaps, a royal translator summoned from far away. Yet there it was, resting in Alistair's hand like a toy. "My lord, that document," Lady Eveline began quietly, "is a harmless piece of ink and parchment," Alistair cut in, never taking his eyes off Mara. "Unless, of course, our little maid can truly read it. In which case," he shrugged, as if the idea were laughable, "we'll all be very impressed." He rose from his seat and descended the 2 steps from the high table, closing the distance between them until he stood almost eye to eye. The hall held its breath. Alistair dangled the scroll between thumb and forefinger. "Here," he said. "If you can read even one line of this, I will personally see that you are rewarded. If you cannot," his smile sharpened, "Shekini, you will apologize for wasting my time and daring to pretend you are anything more than what you are." Whispers hissed through the room like snakes. She pretended? Did she brag? Did someone lie about her? Mara knew the truth. She had never told anyone what she understood. She had been careful, very careful. Apparently, not careful enough. Her gaze flicked toward the far end of the hall, where King Rowan sat, watching. His expression was unreadable, but he had not stopped Alistair. Not yet. Mara looked back at the scroll. The foreign letters danced at the edge of her memory, shapes she knew as well as the cracks in the castle walls. She had traced them secretly by candlelight since she was a child, when a traveling scholar had owed her father a favor and paid in lessons instead of coin. She could read it, all of it, but every instinct screamed that this was a trap. "Mara?" Alistair said softly, so only those closest could hear. Yet the hall was so silent his words seemed to carry everywhere. "You wanted to play at being more than a maid. Here's your chance." He extended the parchment. Her hand moved on its own, fingers closing around the scroll. The ribbon felt rough against her skin. "He thinks this is a game," she realized. "He thinks I'll stumble over the words, stutter, make a fool of myself. He thinks he can break me in front of everyone, and nothing will touch him." Mara unrolled the parchment slowly. The ink was dark and elegant, the script flowing like water. Her eyes ran over the lines, and something else tightened in her chest. Not fear this time, but shock. She read the first sentence, then the second, then the third. Her vision tunneled. For a moment, the voices, the hall, the torches, everything blurred into the background. No, this can't be right. The envoy's letter was not a polite note about trade, as everyone believed. It was a warning, a secret warning, and it was about Lord Alistair. Mara's heart hammered against her ribs. "Go on," Alistair urged, his voice dripping with mock encouragement. "Show us all your great talent." She slowly lifted her eyes to meet his. Something in her gaze had changed. The fear was still there, but underneath it, a calm, icy clarity began to rise. For the first time, Lord Alistair hesitated. He couldn't explain it. She was just a maid in a plain gray dress. Yet suddenly, standing there in the torchlight with that scroll in her hand, she did not look small. She looked dangerous. Mara drew a quiet breath. If she spoke, she would not just prove him wrong. She would put a blade to his perfect, carefully polished life. He wanted a crowd, she thought. He wanted an audience. Very well. He had one. Mara turned, just enough so that her voice would carry toward the high table, toward the king, toward the nobles, toward everyone who had laughed at her moments ago. "My lord," she said, her voice steady at last, "shall I read what is written here, word for word?" Dozens of candles flickered as a draft passed through the hall, as if the castle itself were waiting. Lord Alistair's smile didn't quite reach his eyes now. "By all means," he said, and in that instant, Mara understood something important. He had no idea that the secret on that parchment would not humiliate her. It would destroy him. Time seemed to stretch thin, like spun glass, ready to shatter at the slightest sound. Mara held the parchment in both hands, feeling every gaze in the great hall press against her skin. The foreign letters stared back at her, sharp and merciless. She knew this script. She knew its weight. And now, she knew what it said about the man standing inches away. Lord Alistair of Highmere has been selling information about his own king. That was the heart of the message. Dressed in polite formality, wrapped in diplomatic language, but poison all the same. The envoy from Al-Shahir had not come only to discuss trade. He had come to warn King Rowan that the man he trusted to manage negotiations was already working for the highest bidder. And that man was grinning at her like this was a delightful party trick. "Well?" Alistair prompted, loud enough for the hall to hear. "Or has our little maid decided she can't read after all?" A low chuckle ran through the crowd. Mara's fingers tightened on the parchment, crinkling its edge. Part of her wanted to throw it back at him, lie, pretend it was nonsense. If she read it aloud, she would be pulling a blade from a sheath and plunging it straight into his chest. Metaphorically, maybe, but in this world, metaphor had a way of turning into reality. And yet, she remembered the kitchens, the long hours, the way Alistair spoke to servants like they were furniture that sometimes made noise. She remembered the village where she'd been born, burned to the ground in a border raid while nobles argued over whose fault it was. She remembered her father coughing in the dark, still thanking the king for protection that hadn't come. Alistair and men like him had always stood higher, always looked down, always assumed the ground beneath their boots would never give way. Her heart hammered once, twice, then slowed. Mara bowed her head, not in submission, but to hide the look in her eyes. "As you wish, my lord," she said softly. She lifted her gaze to the king first, not to Alistair. "Your Majesty," Mara called, projecting her voice across the hall. "With your permission, I will read." Gasps rippled through the room. A maid addressing the king directly? That alone would have been bold. But King Rowan merely inclined his head, his expression unreadable. "Read," he said. The single word fell like a stone into still water. Mara turned the parchment so the lines caught the light. When she spoke, she did so in the fluid, rolling language of Al-Shahir. a tongue most of the hall had only heard from the envoy's lips. The sound seemed out of place in a northern stone castle, yet it flowed from her mouth as naturally as breathing. Several nobles flinched in surprise. At the back of the hall, the foreign envoy, until then a quiet shadow near the pillars, straightened sharply, eyes widening. Mara read the first line in al-Shahiri, then repeated it slowly in the common tongue. To His Majesty, Rowan of High-Mer, from Emir Hamid of al-Shahir. I write with urgency, for I have discovered a grave betrayal within your court. A sharp crack echoed through the hall. Someone had dropped a goblet. Alistair's smile faltered for the first time. Mara continued, the words gaining strength as if they'd been waiting for this moment. The man who comes to you as loyal advisor and negotiator has, in secret, sent messages to my enemies, offering knowledge of your armies, your trade routes, and your weaknesses in exchange for gold. The silence tightened like a noose. Every head turned slowly toward Lord Alistair. Color drained from his face, then flooded back in a rush. That's enough, he snapped, stepping closer. She's lying. She's making it up. She could be saying anything. From the corner of her eye, Mara saw the envoy move forward. The man wore rich fabrics and a short golden beard, his dark eyes sharp as steel under candlelight. In the name of al-Shahir, the envoy called, voice steady. She is not lying. His accent was thick, but his words were clear. I wrote that letter, he said. Every word she has spoken is mine. A murmur exploded into outright chaos. Nobles twisted in their seats to look from Mara to Alistair to the king, like spectators at a duel in which they had suddenly realized the weapons were real. King Rowan rose slowly from his chair. The old wooden throne creaked, but his presence filled the hall more completely than any noise. Continue, he commanded, eyes fixed on Mara. Alistair whirled toward him. Your Majesty... Silence, Rowan said. The word hit like a blow. Alistair's jaw clenched. Mara swallowed and went on. There was no turning back now. I have in my possession copies of these letters, she translated, reading line after line. They bear the seal of your noble house of High-Mer, and the hand of Lord Alistair himself. He offers troop movements, grain supplies, and even hints of your private council decisions. With each accusation, it was as if another stone was pulled from the foundation under Alistair's feet. He laughed, short, harsh, too high. This is absurd. She is a maid, a nobody. How can you trust her word over mine? Mara lowered the parchment at last. I did not ask to be trusted, my lord, she said quietly. You asked me to read. A few servants near the walls traded quick, amazed glances. The hall was cracking, and they could feel it. The envoy stepped out fully now, standing halfway between the king and where Mara and Alistair faced each other. When I arrived, he said, Lord Alistair insisted no one here could understand my language but him. Imagine my surprise when I saw your maid pause behind me. And her eyes followed every word I spoke. Mara's cheeks heated, but she did not look away. I thought she was a spy, the envoy admitted, so I watched her. She did not pass messages. She did not listen at doors. She simply worked and pretended not to understand. Alistair's hands curled into fists. This is a foreign trick, he spat. He is turning you against your own, your Majesty, using a servant as his puppet. It might have worked. In another hall, with another king, on another day. But not tonight. Not after the envoy's letters. Not after Mara's flawless reading. Not with the entire court now seeing cracks in the image of perfection Lord Alistair had spent years polishing. Then something unexpected happened. Mara stepped slightly to the side, no longer between Alistair and the king, but off to one angle, as if clearly choosing a side. She bowed deeply to the king. Your Majesty, she said, voice as steady as if she were serving wine. May I speak, not as a maid, But as someone whose life has depended on the choices made in this hall, servants did not speak like this. They certainly did not ask to speak like this. Yet King Rowan did not stop her. The entire room leaned in. "Say what you will," the king replied. Mara straightened. Her hands no longer shook. "When the border village of Brindle was burned," she began, "I was 8 years old. My father died believing it was bad luck. The rest of us were told it was the price of war." She glanced around. "But war has a cost chosen by men like him." She tilted her head toward Alistair without even looking at him directly, as if he were no more than a shadow. "I have carried platters of food past this table for years," she went on. "I have heard jokes about acceptable losses, while men like my father lay in the ground. I have watched lords drink and laugh, while servants counted every scrap they could take home." Her gaze locked on Alistair at last. "You taught us something, my lord," she said. "You showed us very clearly who matters and who doesn't." There was no anger in her voice now. That scared him more than shouting would have. "And what happens," she asked softly, "when the people who don't matter are the only ones in the room who can see the knife at the king's back?" A low sound rolled through the hall, not laughter, not words, more like a shared exhale. For the first time in his life, Lord Alistair seemed at a loss. He took a step toward her, then stopped, as if the space between them had turned into something dangerous. "You think you can speak against me?" he hissed, just loud enough that those nearest could still hear. "You think this changes anything? I built this hall. I feed these people. You used this hall," Mara corrected quietly. "You fed yourself." The envoy's eyes shone with something like reluctant admiration. King Rowan turned to him. "Are there truly copies of these letters?" "Yes, your majesty," the envoy replied, "hidden with men loyal to my house. If I do not return, they will be sent elsewhere." The threat was implied, not spoken. Everyone heard it anyway. Rowan's jaw tightened. "Guards," he said at last. Armor clanked as 2 lines of castle guards stepped from the shadows along the walls. For years they had stood like decorations. Tonight they moved. "Lord Alistair of Highmere," the king declared, "until this matter is investigated, you are relieved of your duties and confined to your chambers." The hall broke into a dozen voices at once. Some nobles looked outraged, others terrified, some secretly pleased. Servants stared like they had just seen a storm change direction mid-strike. Alistair's face went white, then red. "You cannot do this," he whispered. "On the word of a foreigner and a maid? I am Highmere. I am—" "Enough," Rowan said. The king's voice was not loud, but the room recoiled anyway. Slowly, almost reluctantly, the guards approached Alistair. He backed away 1 step, another. Then his eyes landed on Mara once more. Hatred burned there now, pure and focused. "This isn't over," he muttered, low enough that only she could hear as the guards took his arms. "You just made yourself very important, girl. And important people. Break." Mara held his gaze. "I've been broken before," she said. "It didn't stick." The guards pulled him away. As the heavy doors closed behind Lord Alistair, the great hall of Highmere seemed to exhale. Conversations began to buzz again, hushed and frantic. People stared at Mara as if a statue had stepped off its pedestal and asked them to move aside. She suddenly felt very small again. Her knees wobbled. Then, from the high table, the king spoke once more. "Mara," Rowan called, "remain." Tomas, watching from the servants' line at the edge of the hall, caught her eye and mouthed, "What are you doing?" She had no answer. Mara stayed where she was, clutching the parchment like it might still somehow vanish and undo everything. The king descended from the high table, the envoy a step behind him. Up close, Rowan looked older than she'd imagined. Lines etched by sleepless nights, not just by age. His eyes, however, were sharp and clear. "You have just done something very dangerous," he said quietly. Mara's breath caught. "Yes, Your Majesty." "And something very necessary," he added. She blinked. Rowan took the parchment back from her hands, his fingers brushing hers for the briefest moment. "Someone has been watching you, Mara," he said, far more carefully than Lord Alistair ever did. He glanced at the envoy, then back at her. "I suspect," the king continued, "that we have use for a maid who listens when no one thinks she understands." The words sank in slowly. Mara wasn't sure which was stronger, the relief that she was not being dragged away with Alistair, or the cold realization that she had just stepped into a game far more dangerous than carrying wine and bread. A new kind of silence fell between the three of them. Not fearful, not mocking. It felt like the moment before a door opens. "Come to my council chamber at dawn," Rowan said at last. "We will speak further, about secrets and loyalty, and what it means to truly serve a kingdom." He turned away, walking back toward the high table. The envoy gave Mara a small nod, something respectful in his eyes. "Tonight," he murmured as he passed, "you chose to read. Remember this when others try to make you small again." Then he, too, was gone. Mara stood alone in the middle of the great hall, the echoes of her own voice still hanging in the rafters, mingling with the crackle of torches and the frantic whispers of people who had just watched the world tilt. She had stepped forward because a proud man thought she would fall. Instead, she had pulled the floor out from under him. But in the quiet that followed, with the taste of fear and triumph still sharp on her tongue, one thought throbbed at the back of her mind. If I could destroy him with one secret, how many secrets will they now expect me to carry? Outside, unseen by the nobles, storm clouds gathered over Hymir's towers, and somewhere beyond the walls, Lord Alistair's loyal men were already hearing the news and deciding what they would do about the maid who had turned the hall against their lord. Dawn over Hymir was usually a quiet thing, cold light spilling over gray stone, smoke rising from chimneys, the clatter of buckets in the courtyard, sleepy guards changing shifts while servants hurried like ghosts between doorways. This morning, everything felt sharper. Mara walked through the inner corridor toward the council chamber, the hem of her plain dress brushing the flagstones. She had slept in snatches, haunted not by what she'd done, but by what might come next. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Alistair's face as the guards took him away. Important people. Break. He had meant it as a threat, but the more she turned the words over, the more she realized something. He had never understood what it meant to be truly breakable. Servants broke all the time, under work, under hunger, under silence. And still, every morning, they rose. When Mara reached the heavy door of the council chamber, two royal guards stepped aside without a word. One of them, a veteran with a scar across his nose, gave her a look that might almost have been respect. Inside, the room was smaller than the great hall, but felt somehow heavier. A long table, maps pinned to the walls, thick curtains drawn half-closed against the pale morning. King Rowan stood near the window, hands clasped behind his back. The envoy from Al-Shahir sat at the table, a steaming cup before him. Two members of the king's small inner council waited, their faces tight. No one spoke until the door thudded shut behind her. "Mara," Rowan said, "come forward." She obeyed, stopping at the edge of the table. "Last night," the king began, "you exposed a traitor in front of my entire court. Do you understand the weight of that?" "Yes, Your Majesty," she replied, though the full weight was still falling piece by piece. "Good," Rowan said, "because the weight has not finished falling." He nodded to one of the counselors, a sharp-eyed woman with ink stains on her fingers. "Lord Alistair had friends," the woman said quietly. "Men who grew fat off the same gold that tempted him. They will not sit idle while his world collapses. Some have already left the castle. Others..." She glanced toward the door. Linger. The envoy's dark gaze settled on Mara. Men like Alistair, he said, do not fear kings as much as they fear those who know their secrets. Mara's mouth went dry. You mean, they might come after me? Not might, the counselor said. Will. A chill slid along Mara's spine, but beneath it, something stubborn rose. They went after a king, she reminded them softly, by selling his secrets. I am only a maid. Not anymore, Rowan said. The words rang in the quiet room. You are now, he continued, a maid who can read what others cannot, who hears what others ignore, who stood before a hall full of nobles and chose truth over safety. He paused, holding her gaze. That makes you dangerous, whether you wanted it or not. Mara looked down at her hands, calloused, scarred from burns and cuts. Hands that had always been trusted with everyone else's mess, never with anything as delicate as power. I don't know how to be anything else, Your Majesty, she admitted. I only know how to carry what people drop and clean what they spill. A faint smile tugged at the envoy's mouth. That, he murmured, is precisely the kind of person who should handle secrets. Rowan stepped closer to Mara, voice low but firm. I will not pretend this is a gift, he said. It is a burden. You can walk away. I could send you quietly to another holding, give you land far from here, let you live anonymously. It would be kinder. Mara's heart clenched. A life far away. A small house. A field. No more cold stone halls. No more lords with sharp smiles and sharper words. It sounded like a dream. But then she remembered Brindle, her father's cough, the smoke that turned the sky black. How many people in how many villages would never get the choice she was being offered now? What is the other path? She asked. Rowan drew a slow breath. You remain here, he said. You learn. You listen. Officially, you will still be a maid. No title to paint a target on your back. Unofficially, you will serve as my eyes and ears among those who think themselves safe behind their status. The counselor slid a small leather pouch across the table. It clinked softly. We can move your family if you have any, she added. Protect those who might be used against you. Mara's chest ached for a moment with an old emptiness. I have no one left, she said. It's only me. The envoy inclined his head. Then perhaps, from now on, you choose who is yours. Mara lifted her chin. What happens to Lord Alistair? She asked. Rowan's face hardened. He will be tried, the king said. Properly, with evidence and witnesses, not in the shadows as he preferred to work. And if they find more names on those letters? Mara pressed. The counselor's eyes glinted. Then more chairs at the high table will be empty. Silence settled over them, heavy but clean. Mara closed her eyes for a heartbeat. She pictured herself leaving, vanishing into a quiet life somewhere nobody yelled her name across great halls. But when she tried to hold that picture, it slipped away, replaced instead by the sight of servants watching her last night with something like hope. The invisible had seen one of their own stand in the light. If she left now, what did that say? When she opened her eyes again, they were different. I will stay, Mara said. No tremor this time. I will serve the kingdom, not as a lord, not as a lady, as who I am. Rowan nodded once, sharply, the way a general acknowledges a soldier stepping into formation. So be it, he declared. From this day, you serve in my household directly. You will still carry platters if needed, scrub floors if needed. But when letters arrive in tongues we do not know, they will first pass through your hands. The counselor slid a small metal token toward her. A simple disc stamped with the royal crest. This will grant you passage through halls usually closed to servants, she said. Use it sparingly. Vanish when you are not needed. Be no more interesting than a shadow. Mara picked up the token. It was heavier than it looked. A sudden pounding sounded on the council chamber door. Everyone turned. A guard stepped inside, armor askew, breath sharp. "Your Majesty," he said, "there was an incident in the lower courtyard. 2 of Lord Alistair's personal men tried to leave the castle armed. When challenged, they drew steel." Rowan's expression darkened. "Anyone hurt?" "One guard wounded, sire, not badly. One of Alistair's men was killed. The other—" He hesitated, then continued. "The other asked to speak a name before he died." Mara's stomach twisted. "Whose?" the king asked. The guard glanced at Mara before he answered. "Hers," he said. He said, "Tell the maid. This is just the first warning." Then he was gone. The room seemed to tilt for a moment, the air going thin. Mara's fingers dug into the token in her palm. Fear rose, raw, animal, but it did not sweep her away. Instead, it hit something solid inside her and spread out, thin, like water over stone. Rowan's jaw tightened. "Redouble the watch," he told the guard. "Any man who rode for Highmere with Alistair and is not in my sight by sundown will be hunted like a traitor." The guard bowed and left. Silence again. Mara let out a shaky breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "They will keep coming, won't they?" she said. "Some will," Rowan agreed. "But they are not the only ones watching, Mara." He turned, looking at the maps on the wall. Lines of borders and roads and tiny ink marks, where someone had once decided lives. "For years, men like Alistair have believed the kingdom belongs only to them," the king said. "They thought no one below them was paying attention." He glanced back at her. "Last night, you proved them wrong." The envoy rose from his chair. "In my land," he said, "we tell a story about a servant who overheard a prince plotting against his father. She had no sword, no armor, no allies. But she had one thing no one valued: the right to stand near doors." He smiled faintly. "Sometimes, the kingdom is not saved by the one on the throne, but by the one holding the tray." Mara almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was the first time anyone had compared what she did to something that mattered. "Then I will stand near doors," she said, "and I will listen." Rowan inclined his head in a small, rare gesture of respect. "As King Rowan of Highmere," he said quietly, "I accept your service." The formal words settled over her shoulders like a cloak. Not silk, not velvet. Something better. Responsibility. As the meeting ended and the others drifted toward their tasks, Mara lingered by the map wall. Her gaze found the small ink mark where Brindle had once been. Her fingers brushed it lightly. "Second chances," she murmured. Behind her, the counselor spoke. "Not everyone gets them." "I know," Mara said. "That's why, when they appear, we shouldn't waste them." She turned and left the council chamber. The halls outside were already buzzing with versions of the story from last night. Twisted, exaggerated, reshaped by fear and gossip. Some said she'd bewitched Lord Alistair. Others whispered she was secretly royal. A few muttered that she wouldn't live long. Mara walked through it all like a ghost among giants. In the great hall, servants were scrubbing away spilled wine and food. Nobles' footprints had left dirty streaks across the floor. Someone had dropped a goblet. Last night's crack still echoed in Mara's mind. Tomas hurried over when he saw her. "You're still here," he blurted. I heard they—" "I'm still here," Mara said. His gaze dropped to the token in her hand. "That's new," he whispered. "Yes," she said simply. "It means I have more to do than wash plates." Tomas looked up at her, something like pride warming his face. "Good," he said. "About time someone up there realized we have eyes too." Mara smiled, small but real. She pocketed the token and picked up a cloth. "Come on," she told him. "If the kingdom is going to keep its secrets, we can at least start by keeping this floor from killing a messenger." As she knelt to scrub, The great hall didn't feel quite as big as before. The banners still hung high. The tapestries still told stories of kings and battles. But now, somewhere between those woven legends and the cold stone, another story was taking shape. One that no one had ordered carved. The story of a castle maid who refused to bow when it mattered, who turned a cruel lord's game into his downfall, who learned that sometimes the smallest hands carry the heaviest truths. Outside, word spread through Hymir and beyond. A lord had fallen, a king had listened, and a servant had spoken. For some, it was a warning. For others, it was a promise. In the kingdom of second chances, people would whisper about that night for years. How an arrogant lord publicly mocked a castle maid, and how seconds later, she destroyed him with one secret he never thought she'd live long enough to tell.